Hi everyone, I wanted to take a moment and say thanks in advance for taking the time out to watch this presentation, and I hope that you guys are able to learn something from it. Today I'm going to be doing an oral tradition report on stories in stone knapping. For starters, I'd like to welcome you guys to Glass Buttes, Oregon, where obsidian can be found. We're also going to be focusing in a bit today on the Klamath or Macklack stories and traditions surrounding stone knapping. So before we dive into the culture groups that we're going to be talking about today, I wanted to give you guys a chance to kind of familiarize yourselves with the location of where Glass Buttes, Oregon is going to be and the many different tribes that are actually going to have access to this location as an obsidian source. So on the left side here, we have a modern day map. It's got Oregon, some of Washington, Idaho, California, surrounding states. And then on the right side here, we've got kind of an informal map that I managed to pull up that's got some pretty basic locations for different tribes in the area. That way you guys can kind of take a look and see. Obsidian stone tools manufactured from Glass Buttes have been found archaeologically located throughout the Pacific Northwest Coast, Plateau, California, and Great Basin culture regions. They've been attributed to numerous Native American groups in archaeological context. Notably, the Klamath tribe, several of their members have fond memories of making trips with their grandfathers to and from Glass Buttes to collect obsidian. And the Northern Paiute are also going to be another group who would have regularly visited this location. At this point, you might be wondering what obsidian is. Obsidian is an igneous rock. It's a glass lava flow. And there are multiple materials that knapping can be done with. There's flint, chert, jasper, I think quartzite, a few other materials, but for today we're going to focus mostly on obsidian knapping. So most of you are going to recognize obsidian or stone tools such as knives, spears, arrowheads, scrapers, hand axes, and the like as a functional piece of material culture or an item that's going to be attributed to life ways such as hunting, gathering, stuff like that. But there's also another realm behind this, which is going to be the spiritual culture. For a lot of groups, obsidian knives would have been passed down from older generations down to younger men or women within the tribe, and they're going to hold a very special, significant spiritual relevance to each member. Along with that, there's going to be several stories that have been passed down about where obsidian or stone tools came from, their importance to the tribes, and it's going to provide us with an oral tradition to show us where they believe these skills came from. Two of the stories we're going to look at today are going to come from the Klamath and the Shasta. The first one I'm going to cover very basically. I'm not going to go through the whole story because it is very long, but for fear of butchering this word, I'm going to use the English translation, which is the Old Man and the Ancient One. So he has created man and woman, and after they were tricked out of the food that he gave them, he decided to teach them how to make obsidian arrowheads and how to make and use bow and arrows and sinew to hunt. So in doing this, he gives them the ability to get food when there is no other food available. The next story we're going to look at is going to be a Shasta story about Old Man Obsidian and Ground Squirrel, who winds up stealing arrows from Old Man Obsidian for everyone in the Shasta tribe. So in this story, which is also rather long, so I'm going to shorten it down for you guys, Ground Squirrel sets out knowing that Old Man Obsidian's favorite food is going to be roots, and he's going to take these roots to Old Man Obsidian and try and trick him into either giving him or leaving him alone with some obsidian arrowheads. That way he can steal them and bring them back. On the way, he gets squished by a grizzly bear, which he winds up using to his advantage to kind of make Old Man Obsidian feel sorry for him and to go out and get stuff for him. That way when Old Man Obsidian leaves, he can steal these arrowheads and bring them back to everyone in the tribe. In a few moments, we're going to get into some of the ethnographic exercises that I did for this report, with me actually learning hands-on from a Pacific Northwest napper about how to actually napstone and create tools for myself. But before we get there, I'm going to just go through some traditional tools that you might see and give you a basic breakdown. So on the left here we have a bunch of basic stone tools and some antler, and the stone tools are going to be used as striker stones, and we're going to get into a little bit of that later. Other things that could have been used as striker stones is going to be large portions of antler or bones. And then bones and antler are also going to be used not only for knapping and pressure flaking, but they're also going to be used as handles for implements, along with wooden handles. A lot of objects are going to be bound together with a pine pitch tar, which is a really sticky substance, and then they're going to be wrapped in sinew or even leather strips to kind of give them a little bit more stability and keep them together. On the right side here, we're going to have at the top a couple examples of knives. One's got an antler handle, the other one's got a jawbone handle. The large spear point is actually going to be made out of bone, but from what I hear, there was actually a good probability that obsidian was used in either creating this item or the other items attached to it, like the actual wooden piece that it's attached to, or processing the sinew out of an animal. And then as we move towards the bottom left corner of that photo, we're going to have what's called a biface, and this is something that's going to be able to be chipped down to much smaller sizes, and that's going to move more towards spear points and arrowheads, which you'll see to the right of that biface. And then all the way on the bottom right of this photo, we're going to have what's going to be called a scraping or scalpel tool. And then just above that, we're going to have what would be the blade for either a hand axe or a large knife. And then we're going to explore some more modern tools. On the left side here, on top of the rest of these obsidian pieces, you're going to see a couple different tools that have like a copper head to them. And there's going to be the first two to the left on that are going to be striker tools, so that's for knapping. And then on the right of those two is going to be pressure flaking tools. And then I wanted to cover some of the more modern art forms that have come up. There's a lot of jewelry that's been made, and certainly back in more historical times, obsidian was definitely used for decoration and adornment purposes. But the examples that I have to show you today are going to be much more modern examples of what you might see on someone making like an arrowhead necklace or something like that. There's a variety of different sizes and shapes, and for the most part, every tribe's going to have their own basic design for what they look for in a tool and how they actually produce one. But again, this is something that's going to be, high value as a trade item, so this is something where you might find a piece that was made by one tribe in a completely different location. Some of the things that I didn't get a chance to picture are going to be very small chips and fragments, which are going to be used as bird tips, and those are a lot smaller than most of the arrowheads and points that you're going to be seeing here. Alright, so what we have here is called a spall, and in order to get something like this off of the main rock, they're going to take a tool, antler, bone, something like that, or maybe another rock, and they're going to come in and they're going to strike down, and hopefully this will fracture off from the main rock. Go right where?
Right here. Can you get us in there?
And why are we going to go there?
Okay.
Looks like a good spot to get it.
No, when obsidian comes out of the ground in this form, it's got a flow to it. And so you would find an edge that has an abrasion to it, so you can form a spot to start working the rock. Right here is a formed edge. So the next step would be to take this one off, and what you're going to try to produce is a conchoidal fracture. You can see it like wavelengths. It's going to have a nipple, and then it's going to wave down through the rock. So if we're lucky, we'll get this.
All right.
Yep, you might have to edit, but there is a poorly made conchoidal, and we got a second piece off that's a little better. That edge right there is as sharp as a scalpel. I'll guarantee it. Cut you in a heartbeat. And then the Native Americans would use that for processing hides. You would use that to scrape a hide or actually cut a hide up to make ribbons so that you could manufacture a handle for a hand axe that you would make out of something like this. So
Alrighty, the next step we're going to take is we're going to take an abrasive surface and make a platform. And that's basically just creating a striking surface on this ball, so we can hopefully fracture a conchoidal piece off with another tool. Should I have more support under? No? How hard? Whack it?
let her go. There is a conchoidal spall. Hold it up there. And that's where it came off.
And if all goes well, you're going to get a conchoidal fracture that's going to be like this tool here, which is in fact actually a scraping tool. So they would use this for processing hides, cutting meat. And they would come through and just scrape at a hide, get pieces off of it, smooth it out.
Or you can cut the hide with it.
Do you want me to cut it?
Yeah. Good. And that is 1/4 inch thick cowhide. From this that we just busted off here, they would use tools and work it down toward this. Now this is not a finished arrowhead, but it would be more like this until they got to a place where they were actually going to decide what type of game to use it for. This you would use for bigger game. You could put barbs on it for fishing. You could make it smaller for smaller game. Okay, you want to be safe, so they would have a pad. Then to make it this way, they would take the original rock and they would simply start busting off little pieces of rock until they whittle it down, or they would use the process of knapping it just like they did when it was bigger to get it to the size that they want it. This one they would very quickly work it off, and there's why this was taught from person to person. 80% of the rocks that get started are going to break by an amateur knapping.
Alright, so the next technique I'm going to show you real quick is called pressure flaking. This is something that we're going to be more introduced to by Ishi. If you remember a couple weeks ago, we covered some information about him in class. He's one of the last Yahi. So this is a technique that he would have used called pressure flaking. So what we're going to do is, whereas before we were knapping, coming down, hitting the rock to create the force to create a fracture, in this we're going to be pushing against the rock with enough pressure to kind of snap it back. Here. And a lot of pressure.
Mm-hmm. Go a little farther down the rock. Get a little thinner spot there. There you go. That little chip is how you create the edge to create a knife blade, arrowhead blade, any other of the essential tools that were used at the time. This can also be done, and was done, with an antler point for many years. The other method of strike point knapping, you can take all the way down to a very fine arrowhead once you've developed technique.
Something I do not have yet.
Okay. Find your platform. Abrasion. Down here. And why don't you take a hit off that with that tool? So,
here.
Yep. And that demonstrates how in one object both techniques might be usable and very valid. Go ahead and give it a strike. Don't be shy.
I know.
And there again, you take a small chip off. Go ahead. Nicely done. Give it another one.
And after quite a bit of work, you will eventually work your piece down to resemble something more like these, which are on their way towards being more finished arrowheads. This one's still on the rougher side, whereas this one, if you take a look, the edge on it is actually getting quite a bit more sharp. You've got a defined tip. So this is going to be well on its way to being a very useful tool. And if all goes well and you manage to make it through knapping a piece, you're at the point where you're going to be assembling a piece together. This varies depending on what the tool is going to be used for. Attaching an arrowhead is going to typically be attached to a piece of wood. In this instance, we have a knife here that was attached with pine pitch tar to an antler handle with sinew to bind the blade together. Okay, I wanted to thank all of you for taking the time to watch this presentation. I know it was a little bit on the long side, but I think we crammed quite a bit of good information into it, and I'm hoping I didn't oversimplify any of the information. I hope you enjoyed it, and maybe you might have learned something, or I might have piqued a new interest. Thanks!